Hey John, what's the weather gonna be like today?
Well, I see clouds to the south. They don't look like they have any weather in them. So I'm going to say partly cloudy, mostly sunny. If you're lucky enough to live in a place where you have excellent visibility in multiple directions, you can kind of use that strategy if you understand what direction the weather usually comes from. Now, for us, if we get up on a ladder or something and we kind of look around to the southeast, south, southwest, usually our weather comes from the south when there are storms and things like that. So if we want to know what the day's weather is going to look like, we can look to the south. Typically comes up over those hills. If you look at the hills out that way, sometimes it comes from a little more eastward, sometimes it comes from a little more westward, but usually from the south. So this no-tech approach can work, but it kind of depends on having good visibility and being in this particular place for long enough and observing things enough and paying attention to know patterns, right? Which direction the wind might come from during which season, which direction the clouds come from that are most likely to be bearing rain and snow, what the clouds look like when they're most likely bearing rain and snow, and things like that. So it's one of the tools in your bag, but it's not the only way to do things. And it helps to have little indicators of, wind speed, wind direction, and all that stuff. But the main shortcoming is that it basically works for like that day. And that it gives you information on what's happening that day, but it doesn't give you a lot of information of what might be coming, and makes it so that it can really help you plan that day, but not future days. Here's an indicator of good weather. A cat sunning itself near a window. Tells you where the warm places are. Cats like to do things like this. But in general, I wouldn't say that cats are a useful tool in weather prediction. So now we're going to talk about adding tools that help us predict a little bit further out than one day. So here is we'll call this an off-grid weather station. Doesn't require batteries, doesn't require electricity. It tells us three things. It tells us the temperature, it tells us the relative humidity, and it tells us atmospheric pressure, or I guess barometric pressure. This is a barometer. So right now it says the weather is fair, right? And it tells us that as pressure is higher, it's going to be drier, and as pressure drops, it's going to be wetter. It comes with this useful little adjustable arrow. So what you can do then is, like every morning, you can have the arrow match what the pressure is, and that allows you to see what direction the pressure is moving, if things are moving towards drier or wetter. And then maybe at night before you go to bed, you do the same thing again and see how the pressure changed overnight. And if you see a very rapid change in one direction or the other, it might tell you that the weather is definitely changing. If it's smaller fluctuations, it's not as definite of a thing. Now, here it tells us what the indoor relative humidity is, because this is indoors and it's next to some plants. So it's going to tell us that things are maybe a little bit more humid than they are in the rest of the house. But these humidity indicators are called hygrometers. It's good to have one indoors and it's good to have one outdoors. Indoors, they tell you when you might need to open a window if things are getting too moist, like if you're drying your laundry inside or something like that. If you have it outdoors, it's useful in that it will tell you if the atmosphere is moister or drier. So let's say you see a big drop in barometric pressure, and your outdoor hygrometer starts telling you higher relative humidity, then you know that things are definitely going to be getting wetter soon. So a lot of people will like to have a hygrometer and a thermometer somewhere outside that they can see it. So with these things, you get an idea. Even if you're inside, you can look outside and say, oh, is it cold and dry? Is it warm and moist? And having this indoors lets you have a general idea of which direction the weather is trending. So this is helpful mostly for telling things, a day or two out. But it's not going to give you a long-range forecast. Now, I came up here to show our weather stations. This is our newer weather station. You can see that it has a little gauge for wind speed. It also takes temperature and humidity and atmospheric pressure readings. Over there is our older weather station. The wind speed thing is not working anymore. Actually, if we still had it hooked up to the little thing that gives us the readout in the kitchen, it still would tell us temperature, humidity, and atmospheric pressure. But we've switched over to a new one. And hey, here's our little internet dish, and there's a wind turbine. Got a lot of things mounted up here. Over there is a 2-meter radio antenna. Anyways, and here are some solar panels. And there's a little, I don't know what you'd call that thing, little mini greenhouse. We're trying to utilize our space pretty efficiently up here on the south-facing side of the house. So this is what our weather station readout looks like on the inside of the house. So it tells us outdoor temperature. This is actually exaggerated because it's a little bit high off the ground, and it's actually in direct sunlight right now. It's probably more like 29 degrees outside, something like that. It tells us the outdoor relative humidity, tells us the wind chill temperature, tells us the recent top wind speed, tells us current wind speed, tells us inside temperature and inside humidity, and it gives this little forecast thingy here. It normally would tell us date and time, but that is completely inaccurate. Our previous weather station had something else down here. Here it just says forecast, sunny. Okay, that's great. Our previous one had like actual bars that showed us like the direction that the barometric pressure was moving. So you could see if it was falling rapidly or if it was increasing. I thought that was much more helpful, but like so many pieces of technology these days, it's trying to do your thinking for you. It's like, oh, telling people the change in atmospheric pressure, that's too much. We don't need them to do that thinking. Let's just tell them it's going to be sunny, which is not always accurate either. Now this one is made by LaCrosse. That's the company that seems to make most reasonably priced weather stations. You can get much more expensive ones, but the two that we've had are both made by LaCrosse, and they're fine. You just got to keep the batteries in them. They take like AA batteries. But like I said, over time they seem to be giving you less and less useful information. But still, it's got all of the basics. And this is a very useful tool in short-term weather prediction.
Moving from low-tech to high-tech, this is a tool that I use all the time. This is the Weather Underground 10-day forecast. I really like it because of the way that it's laid out, because it gives you information on all kinds of different things. I mean, okay, we've got temperature, we've got kind of general forecast. I find, obviously, the farther you go on, the less accurate it is, but it's generally quite accurate, 3 to 5 days out, and it kind of, declines beyond that. But we have this red line here is, the temperature. We also get, you see this green one is the dew point temperature. This purple one is the feels like temperature, or basically temperature, including the wind chill factor. So you can kind of see like, okay, what is it right now? What are the sways going to look like throughout the day? This helps you plan like, oh, it's not going to drop below freezing tonight. That might be helpful to know. Helps you plan things out. You also get pretty good wind speed and wind direction down here. And then, okay, we get chance of rain in this blue bar, or chance of snow, chance of precipitation in general. And then also this gray shows the projected cloudiness. So these are all really useful things if you want to know if it's going to be a sunny day, whether or not you should be conserving your battery power if you live off-grid. And something else that I have used it for is this black line here gives you pressure. So right now the pressure would be 29.99 inches, okay? And that's really helpful when you're trying to calibrate your low-tech weather station. What I did is I adjusted it on the back based on what the pressure was at that time in this location. And then I checked it the next day, and then I found that, yes, okay, we're within a couple of millibars of being accurate. So I used this atmospheric pressure information to make sure that my low-tech weather station was properly calibrated. So that was pretty handy. But generally, I find this to be an accurate forecast. Like I said, in the first several days, it's quite accurate, and it declines in accuracy after that. But something to remember in general, and this is not a hard and fast rule, but low pressure is associated with more cloudiness, usually more precipitation. High pressure is usually associated with sunnier, drier weather. That doesn't mean you can't have rain when you've got high pressure. That doesn't mean it can't be sunny when it's low pressure. These are just kind of general rules. This type of forecast is usually informed by something along these lines. So let me scroll a little bit here. This gives you a model that projects up to 30 days, which is kind of crazy to think about, in 6-hour increments. I don't have all of them loaded here, but we can see, generally where the precipitation is going to be. It also gives you bars that demonstrate differences in pressure. So it makes it really easy to identify low pressure and high pressure systems. We can see we've got massively high pressure up here over the pole or over the Arctic Ocean. We've got another high pressure system here. Air tends to move from areas of high pressure to low pressure. That's going to influence your wind direction because it's always trying to equalize, right? We're always trying to equalize air pressure, equalize temperature. And if you're looking at your low-tech weather station and you're also looking at your other low-tech indicators, and you can see that maybe air pressure is dropping dramatically. Here we've got a low pressure system associated with some precipitation, like I was talking about earlier. But anyway, so you can kind of compare along this to see, like, okay, where is the wind speed and direction hitting my area in association with these differences in pressure. It really helps to kind of look at this type of thing and take notes. Taking notes is so underrated. I would say take notes all the time, because your specific location is going to have its own microclimate, right? It's going to be slightly different from what you see on the forecast here, right? Like I know personally at our house, we can always assume that the temperature at our weather station, which is like 25, 30 feet up in the air, is going to be several degrees warmer than it is at ground level. So it's like I might look at our weather station, our digital one, and I might be like, okay, it says it's like 35 degrees, but I can say that it's probably going to be freezing or below at ground level. So taking notes to note how patterns are slightly different in your specific location is a tremendously helpful tool, because as you take notes, you will notice patterns in maybe how wind speed might be different in your area. Wind direction might be slightly different in your area based on whether you're next to like a little valley or some hills or mountains or coast. That's going to influence this depending on how this is different from the weather station that this is pulling from. How your elevation is different. Like, there's a guy that lives half a mile from me down in the river valley. It's typically 10 degrees colder in his location than it is at my location. So it's really important to take notes. So if you're going to go low tech and no tech weather prediction, always keep a notebook where you've got several different columns, right? You've got temperature, you've got your barometric pressure, you've got your humidity. You probably want to write down wind direction and wind speed to the best of your ability, and start to take note on how that is different from the forecast, how that might relate to broader patterns that you see in these kinds of models. And you're going to find out that you will develop tremendous weather forecasting skills for your location. And again, your location is going to have its own little microclimate, whether you like it or not. And being able to understand that and plan around it it's going to give you a bit of a leg up when it comes to like, oh, I need to bring in that water container so it doesn't freeze tonight. Or, oh, I need to bring in those seedlings because it's going to freeze tonight. Or it'll help you plan when to plant things. It'll help you plan when to hunt, plan when to pick certain things when you're foraging, and so on and so forth. So yeah, use your high-tech tools, but use them as a way of getting to know your low-tech tools so that if you ever have to be without your high-tech tools, you will have already, by taking notes, paying attention, learning your microclimate, you'll have mastered it to, the best degree possible. I mean, we'll still have forecasts for a long time. I'm not saying we won't, but this is a great way to get you more familiar with your own lower tech tools and your own microclimate.